You know, in life and in business, people often believe that the loudest voice always wins. They think that if you shout more, spend more, or show off more, you will always be ahead. But the truth is very different. In the real world, it is not the noise that matters, it is the results. It is not the image you project, but the value you deliver. And this is exactly what we see happening today in Wise Lobby, where one lobby that spent decades building influence is starting to collapse, while another country quietly, patiently, and without fanfare is beginning to win recognition. When you look at India, for years it invested heavily in creating a certain image, the champion of democracy, the rising global power, the reliable partner. But today, that story is cracking. And when you look at Pakistan, a country that has often been underestimated, dismissed, or misrepresented, something remarkable is happening. Without shouting, without spending millions on influence campaigns, Pakistan is showing its true value through its actions, through its geography, and through its undeniable role in shaping regional peace and stability. This is not just about politics. It is about a deeper lesson that applies to every nation, every business, and every person sitting here today. Never confuse noise with strength, and never underestimate the power of being quietly indispensable. Because when the dust settles, reality always speaks louder than propaganda. Tonight, I invite you to listen closely, because what we are about to explore is not only about South Asia or Washington or geopolitics. It is about how truth, patience, and quiet determination can turn the tables even in the most powerful of capitals. If you stay with me until the end, you will see how Pakistan, without declaring victory, is already achieving one, and why this moment matters for the world. India's influence in Washington has often been considered one of its greatest diplomatic achievements in the last 2 decades. With significant investments in lobbying firms, a large diaspora actively engaged in politics, and narratives built around being a strategic counterbalance to China, New Delhi positioned itself as an indispensable partner for the United States. However, that influence is no longer as strong as it once appeared. The reality on the ground is shifting. The decline is not sudden, but rather the result of a gradual erosion where cracks are becoming visible in how Washington views India. Policymakers who once spoke of India with unshakable optimism are now raising questions about its internal contradictions, its actual ability to deliver on promises, and its long-term reliability as an ally. Several factors are contributing to this weakening grip. One of the main issues is India's inability to balance its domestic realities with its international ambitions. Rising concerns about human rights, freedom of the press, and the treatment of minorities have made it harder for lobbyists to defend India's democratic image. In Washington, values matter, at least in terms of public discourse, and India's increasingly authoritarian tendencies are not going unnoticed. In addition, India's cautious stance on major global conflicts, particularly its close ties with Russia, despite Western sanctions, has created doubt about how far the US can trust India in times of crisis. Furthermore, the very lobbying strategy India relied upon, heavy spending on influence campaigns, seems to be losing its charm. Decision makers in Washington are no longer impressed by expensive dinners or large conferences if the results do not match the rhetoric. The credibility gap is widening as promises of economic cooperation, market access, and regional support are not materializing in the way US officials expected. At the same time, India's ongoing disputes with nearly all of its neighbors, including Pakistan, China, and even smaller regional states, present an image of instability rather than leadership. The decline of influence does not mean Washington is completely turning its back on India. It remains a large market and a potential partner in balancing Asia's geopolitics. But the shine has faded, and the lobby's ability to shape opinions in Washington has weakened significantly. The perception of India as the flawless democratic counterweight to China is being replaced with a more cautious, skeptical view, and that shift is creating new space for Pakistan to be noticed once again. America's foreign policy has always been guided by shifting interests rather than permanent friendships, and in recent years, this has become more visible in South Asia. For a long time, Washington seemed deeply invested in cultivating India as a cornerstone of its Indo-Pacific strategy, presenting it as a natural ally against the rise of China. Yet as global realities evolve, that focus is no longer as one-dimensional as it once was. The United States is increasingly aware that while India may appear useful on paper, it cannot fully shoulder the responsibilities expected of it, especially in matters of regional security and global commitments. This realization is prompting a recalibration of American priorities, where Pakistan's role is once again gaining importance. One of the key drivers behind this shift is the U.S. struggle to maintain balance in a complex world. The conflicts in Europe, particularly the war in Ukraine, the ongoing instability in the Middle East, and the challenges of containing China have forced Washington to reconsider its reliance on any single partner. India's reluctance to align fully with American positions, particularly on Russia, has revealed the limits of its strategic commitment. While Washington appreciates India's size and market, it also sees that New Delhi is unwilling to jeopardize its independent foreign policy stance for the sake of U.S. objectives. This independent streak has raised questions about whether India can truly be counted on in times of crisis. In contrast, Pakistan holds an unavoidable relevance that cannot be sidelined, no matter how strained the relationship has been in the past. Geographically positioned at the crossroads of South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East, Pakistan sits at the heart of multiple security and trade routes that are vital for American interests. From counterterrorism cooperation to its role in stabilizing Afghanistan, Pakistan has a track record of being indispensable at critical junctures. Even when Washington distanced itself politically, it never fully disengaged, knowing that no long-term solution in the region could succeed without Pakistan's involvement. Economic and connectivity concerns also play into this shift. The United States understands that future trade corridors, energy pipelines, and regional projects cannot bypass Pakistan if they are to succeed. While India may boast about its market size, Pakistan offers access and connectivity that align more closely with U.S. strategic needs in Asia. Having more, this subtle but significant recognition is leading to a more balanced approach, where Washington is recalibrating its ties in the region. Instead of overinvesting in India, the U.S. is rediscovering the pragmatic value of Pakistan. And this adjustment is reshaping South Asia's diplomatic landscape. Pakistan has often been misunderstood in the global arena because it does not practice the kind of loud and flashy diplomacy that many nations employ to gain attention. Unlike India, which spends millions of dollars annually on lobbying firms, organized campaigns, and media promotions in Washington, Pakistan has chosen a quieter but far more effective path. This silent diplomacy does not rely on grand speeches or exaggerated claims. Instead, it allows Pakistan's strategic relevance to emerge naturally through its actions, its geography, and its undeniable role in shaping regional outcomes. The approach might seem understated, but in the world of international relations, it has proven to be remarkably powerful. One of the reasons this method works is that Pakistan does not try to overpromise. Where others paint themselves as the ultimate solution to America's strategic problems, Pakistan understands that reality speaks louder than rhetoric. The United States may at times criticize Pakistan, but it also knows that every major regional negotiation, from Afghanistan's withdrawal to counterterrorism operations, has required Islamabad's involvement. This reliance creates a credibility that no amount of expensive lobbying can buy. Washington policymakers might have doubts, but they never exclude Pakistan from the table because they know that without it, no regional strategy can succeed. This silent diplomacy is also reflected in how Pakistan positions itself in economic and connectivity matters. While India aggressively markets itself as the next big economic hub, Pakistan quietly secures partnerships like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which offers direct routes that are strategically valuable not only to China, but also to any global power interested in trade through it. Such developments enhance Pakistan's bargaining power without the need for constant promotion. They serve as reminders that geography and access are advantages that cannot be ignored, no matter how much another country spends on image building. Another important element of Pakistan's approach is its ability to adapt to changing circumstances. At times, Islamabad has stepped back to avoid unnecessary confrontations, letting events unfold in ways that ultimately reaffirm its importance. By avoiding a confrontation or boastful style, Pakistan allows Washington to rediscover its value on its own terms. This creates a more sustainable form of recognition, one not tied to temporary media hype, but to enduring strategic necessity. In the long run, this quiet confidence is what sets Pakistan apart and allows it to win diplomatic space without appearing aggressive or desperate for validation. Imran Khan's tenure in leadership marked a turning point in how Pakistan projected itself internationally, and particularly in Washington. Unlike many of his predecessors, he approached the foreign policy with a mix of independence, clarity, and narrative building that resonated beyond Pakistan's borders. His style was direct, sometimes unconventional, but it offered a refreshing departure from traditional diplomatic language that often appeared rehearsed and cautious. In an era where global leaders are scrutinized not only for policies but also for authenticity, Imran Khan's image as a leader who spoke his mind without hesitation helped Pakistan gain renewed attention in Washington. His emphasis on dignity, sovereignty, and fairness in international dealings was not just rhetoric. It was part of a broader attempt to reposition Pakistan as a country that should be respected rather than seen as a dependent partner. One of the most significant contributions Imran Khan made was his insistence on redefining Pakistan's global narrative. For decades, Pakistan's story in Washington was largely told through the lens of security, terrorism, and instability. Khan made an effort to broaden this perspective by highlighting Pakistan's potential as a hub for connectivity, trade, and regional stability. His speeches at the United Nations and interviews with Western media showcased not only Pakistan's challenges, but also its opportunities, shifting the tone from defensive explanations to proactive storytelling. This shift made Washington audiences, both policymakers and think tanks, see Pakistan through a more balanced lens. Imran Khan's global reputation also played an important role. As a former sports icon who was already known worldwide before entering politics, he had a level of soft power that few leaders from South Asia could match. His ability to connect with audiences, particularly younger generations across the globe, gave Pakistan a human face that contrasted with the often negative headlines associated with the country. This popularity translated into diplomatic leverage, as even critics had to acknowledge that he carried a unique influence. Moreover, his insistence on pursuing an independent foreign policy struck a chord in Washington, where there was growing fatigue with countries that appeared too eager to please. Khan's refusal to blindly align Pakistan with any power bloc, whether America, China, or Russia, sent a message that Islamabad wanted to be treated as a sovereign equal, not as a client state. This stance earned both respect and debate in U.S. policy circles, ultimately positioning Pakistan as a nation with its own vision rather than one defined by external expectations. In this way, Imran Khan's role added a layer of credibility to Pakistan's presence in Washington and contributed to the gradual rebalancing of narratives in the region. India has long presented itself as the natural leader of South Asia and a rising global power, but the economic and strategic realities on the ground are increasingly undermining this narrative, particularly in Washington. While its lobby has tried to showcase India as a rapidly growing market and a democratic counterweight to China, deeper challenges are becoming harder to conceal. The Indian economy, despite its size, struggles with high unemployment, income inequality, and a fragile manufacturing sector that has failed to match the pace of its promises. This mismatch between expectations and delivery has created skepticism in Washington, where policymakers are beginning to question whether India can truly fulfill the role it has long advertised. Alongside economic doubts, India's human rights record has become a serious concern. Reports of religious intolerance, curbs on freedom of speech, and violence against minorities are increasingly making their way into U.S. political discussions. For years, lobbyists were able to soften or redirect these criticisms, but with rising global awareness and the visibility of independent watchdogs, these issues are now harder to ignore. In Washington, where democratic values are part of public discourse, such controversies weaken the image India has tried to cultivate as the world's largest democracy. This gap between the advertised brand and the lived reality is damaging the credibility of its lobby. Strategically, India's strained relationships with nearly all of its neighbors also raise doubts about its ability to be a stabilizing regional leader. Border tensions with China, ongoing disputes with Pakistan, and even uneasy relations with smaller states like Nepal and Sri Lanka suggest that India is not the unifying force it claims to be. Instead, it often appears isolated in its neighborhood, which undermines Washington's early assumption that New Delhi could be a reliable anchor for regional stability. These tensions make it difficult for India to present itself as a dependable partner for U.S. strategic objectives. In contrast, Pakistan's role in regional connectivity projects, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative and energy corridors linking Central Asia to the Iranian Sea, highlights its growing importance in areas where India is faltering. While India tries to project its influence through lobbying, Pakistan demonstrates its relevance through tangible projects and geographical advantages. This difference makes Washington reassess where its real interests lie. As India struggles with unfulfilled promises and internal contradictions, Pakistan quietly positions itself as a more pragmatic partner whose value cannot be ignored, reinforcing the perception that India's lobby is losing ground in the American capital. Pakistan's rise in Washington's diplomatic circles has not come with loud celebrations or bold declarations, but with a quiet confidence that reflects a deeper reality. This is what makes it a silent win. For decades, Pakistan was often on the defensive, having to explain itself in terms of security challenges, political instability, or its complicated relationship with the United States. Yet, over time, the narrative has shifted. Without flashy lobbying campaigns or expensive influence strategies, Pakistan has managed to reposition itself as a country that cannot be ignored in South Asia's strategic equation. This is not a win measured in headlines, but in the way policymakers, analysts, and think tanks in Washington now talk about Pakistan, with recognition that its role is essential, whether the subject is Afghanistan, counterterrorism, trade routes, or regional stability. One of the reasons this win is considered silent is because Pakistan has allowed its actions to speak louder than its words. The facilitation of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, for example, was not broadcast as a triumph, but it underscored Pakistan's indispensability. Similarly, Pakistan's geographical positioning and its involvement in major economic corridors like CPEC remind Washington that no regional strategy can bypass Islam, unlike India, which aggressively markets its supposed indispensability. Pakistan lets the ground realities of geography, connectivity, and security do the convincing. This subtle approach has helped rebuild trust and credibility in a way that lobbying dollars cannot. The silent win is also reflected in the way Pakistan is being engaged by Washington on multiple levels. Conversations are no longer limited to terrorism or aid, but are broadening to discussions about trade, investment, and regional cooperation. This shows that the space Pakistan has carved for itself is deeper and more sustainable. It is not about temporary political favors, but about long-term strategic recognition. Such progress may not make headlines, but it builds a stronger foundation for future relations. What makes this particularly significant is that Pakistan is achieving this at a time when India's narrative in Washington is under strain. The decline of India's lobbying efforts and the growing skepticism about its reliability have created room for Pakistan to be seen in a more balanced light. By not rushing to claim victory or exaggerate its role, Pakistan demonstrates maturity in diplomacy. This quiet but steady rise reflects a new chapter in its relationship with Washington, where its value is acknowledged without the need for self-promotion, making it a true silent win. Ladies and gentlemen, as we reflect on this unfolding chapter in Washington, one truth becomes clear. Influence built on exaggerated promises and costly lobbying cannot withstand the test of time, but credibility earned through relevance, geography, and quiet consistency always finds its way back to the table. India's carefully crafted image is now being questioned, while Pakistan's understated yet undeniable role is being recognized again. This shift is not the result of noise or spectacle. It is the outcome of patience, resilience, and the silent strength of a nation that refuses to be sized. Pakistan's story in Washington is no longer one of dependency or apology. It is a story of necessity, of quiet diplomacy, and of strategic importance that cannot be replaced. From its pivotal role in regional peace to its potential as a hub of connectivity and trade, Pakistan is proving that real influence comes not from lobbying halls, but from the real world. This is why the silent win carries greater weight than loud claims. As we close, let us carry forward the understanding that true power lies in authenticity, and that nations like individuals are respected not for how loudly they speak, but for how meaningfully they contribute. Pakistan's moment in Washington is not about a fleeting spotlight. It is about a steady recognition that the future of South Asia cannot be written without its name.